Hi everyone, Alice here. So this is chapter 10, early childhood, again about 2 or 3 years old to 6, so that age range before getting into elementary school. Really fun time. And the focus here is psychosocial development. If you consider for a moment the social world of this developing person, it's really widening quite a bit at this time. So compare it to the 0 to 2 year old, where probably most of the interactions for that very young time is with the primary caregiver. And now during the 2 to 3 to 6 year old time frame, it can be expanding and there might be more or different caregivers and there may be more other children. So a lot of times in the classroom, I tell students to go ahead and turn to the person next to them and compare some very brief notes about where were you when you were 3, 4, 5 years old? Were you at home in the care of parents or primary caregiver, grandparents, other relatives? Were you in some kind of preschool? Were you in a daycare setting? What was the setting? And really, you can compare that pretty well to the infant and see that it is a growing social world. So we're going to talk a bit about a couple of different topics, including emotional regulation, which you can see is on the slide here. Before we get into that, I do want to mention briefly another developmental theorist. So on page 35 in our textbook, you can notice I've tabbed this. I have 3 different tabs, one for Piaget, one for Lev Vygotsky, and now one for Erik Erikson. And this is on page 35, table 2.1. There's actually a really great comparison here. On the left is Sigmund Freud's psychosocial stages of human development, and on the right is Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. So a real quick look at it here, you can see in ages 3 to 6 under Erikson's psychosocial stages, you see the child here, the crises or the task, the social task that the person is going through is something called initiative versus guilt. So what I wanted to introduce this here. Erikson is very well regarded. He was born 1902, died in 1994. He would overlap some time with Freud. But whereas Freud's stages of development are based on psychosexual development, Erikson's stages of development are based on psychosocial. So he felt more the social task or crisis that the person is in that needs to be worked through is what was helping to define the personality or develop the personality of that individual. So it's very interesting to look at Erikson's psychosocial tasks. If you look through them on page 35, and you might find that this could be a basis for a research paper. But let me tell you, when we're really going to come back to this is starting in adolescence. So I wanted to introduce it so that you could mark it in your textbook, and we'll be coming back to that theory later in the course. All right, so back to the psychosocial development of this 3, 4, 5, 6 year old child. Emotional regulation is probably the most important challenge that they face during this time. And it's, as it sounds, it's basically that ability to monitor our own emotions and control them when it's important to do so. And this varies for different children when they're able to do this better and better. And much of it is connected to, excuse me, the ever developing connections in the brain. So as the brain is growing and developing and forming connections and learning, so emotional regulation may also come along. It's very important to know that this is really a lifelong task for us all to be able to regulate our own emotions. So in the classroom, I often ask students to consider, take a moment of insight and ask yourself, uh, what is an emotion that I maybe have a challenge regulating? So what came to mind for me when I was thinking about this before I started this recording was that right now there's a lot of stress in our world. Um, this is the summer or fall of 2020 when I'm making this recording, and COVID-19 is a pandemic in the world that we're living in, and so it creates a lot of stress. How do I manage? How do I regulate that emotion? Do I do yoga? Do I watch a lot of news? Do I have to monitor how much news? So I could go on and talk about this, but the point is that it is a lifelong challenge to be able to recognize and manage your own emotions. So for this 2 to 6 year old child, it is their most important psychosocial accomplishment, and it takes what's called effortful control in order to accomplish it. There are benefits to this development of emotional regulation. Empathy is a very important piece of it, and so it gets mentioned here. Empathy develops with theory of mind, which hopefully we've talked about before this in the chapter on cognition, where a person is now able to take the perspective of a different person and understand a problem or situation from a different point of view. So empathy is kind of putting ourselves in another person's shoes. So if we're able to do that emotionally, it can help develop what we might call pro-social behaviors. So empathy is increasing over time here. And it can, I'm going to go ahead one slide and then I'll go back to that last one. It can help to support moral development. We'll talk about moral development in middle childhood quite a bit more, but moral development is built really over many years. That morality and understanding is parallel with some of Piaget's work around the development of the brain and cognitive understanding. But empathy is a foundation often for moral development. So you can see here some sort of pro-social behavior going on the right. Uh, I think this looks like kind of messing around here on the left, but maybe it's antisocial behavior. All right, so I'm going to go back here. Oops. There are different kinds of types of aggression that get mentioned. They're written here. You can look at them pretty briefly. You'll probably recognize these different types of aggression. And we just mentioned them briefly as part of this emotional regulation. So from the words that they use to describe, to label these aggression types, you probably have some hints on what they are. Instrumental aggression being when we do something in order to get what we want. Reactive, more of you hit me, and so I'm going to hit you. Relational is some of that rumors, shunning of people, and actually I don't see relational until a little bit later. I'm going to say elementary school typically, and bullying is probably the most worrisome, and relational as well in my opinion, but bullying can be a style where you might wonder then, is there something prompting the bullying within the individual's own experience in life? We're going to move forward here to caregiving styles and spend these last few minutes addressing some different caregiving styles. So it introduces another developmental theorist. Her last name is Baumrind, and you'll see it here on the slide. First name Diana. So Diana Baumrind came up with, and I think she did this in the 60s, she came up with different caregiving styles and labeled them. She based these they're going to be 4 different styles, and you may recognize your own parent styles, your style, friends or family members. You'll see some of the different styles may be reflected. But Baumrind thought that how we express warmth to children, how we discipline children, how we communicate, and what our expectations of the child are, all contribute to these different styles. So the first one here is authoritarian. And I would write these down because a couple of the words sort of sound and feel very much alike, and so writing them down is very helpful. Authoritarian parents have very high behavioral expectations of the children, and they have strict punishments of or consequences of any misconduct. And there's very little communication. There might be sort of laying down the law, and then if you cross the line, the consequence happens. That's the authoritarian parenting. Permissive feels like the opposite. There's a lot of nurturing, a lot of communication going back and forth, but very little discipline, very little kind of sharing of information about how to do things as far as guidance goes. But there's communication, listening, nurturing, but then the children are allowed to make a lot of decisions on their own without a lot of consequence. It's very permissive, per the word. Okay, so then there's authoritative, which always feels to me like a bit of a mix of the other two. These parents are setting limits, they're enforcing the rules, there are consequences, but there's some flexibility. So there is some listening. It's not quite as right or wrong. There's sort of a gray area where things can be worked out and discussed. The last style sometimes is, it's called out differently. It's not permissive is what they're trying to say, but it's more of an uninvolved parent. This parent really is not showing the caring of the children. They're pretty absent from the child's life. So there are long-term effects of the different styles, and they mention them here very quickly. So the authoritarian, children of the authoritarian parents are conscientious, they do what they're told, but maybe they're not especially happy. So this is what Baumrind's research tended to show. They tend to rebel when they get to an age where they can move out and leave home, and they do so pretty quickly. There are some other characteristics here that you can also see. Feelings of guilt or depression. Permissive parents, remember those are the ones that high communication and nurturance, but not as much in the way of guidelines. These children sometimes lack self-control. They might not have the as good an emotional regulation, although maybe that will come later. Continue to live at home, still dependent in early adulthood. And then authoritative parents may have children who are, spoiler alert, I guess I would say here, these are the ones that are the most successful, they do the best, happy with themselves, generous with others, so well liked, etc. Now, Baumrind's research, like all kinds of research, has, here, I'll move that there, has critics and potentially problems. So you probably find updates on parenting styles since Diana Baumrind's work, and this will be another interesting thing to potentially do research on. So one of the criticisms that the last two I actually appreciate the most. One is that permissive parent might have more going for them than what Baumrind said, and also that the child has a temperament that might be contributing to this to the relationship between parent and child that is sort of overlooked, I guess I would say. in her description of parenting styles. So we're about out of time here. I'll let you read this last slide, and thank you for your attention.